The Supreme Court is racist and sexist and must be abolished. That's according to Democratic voters who were polled by Heartland Institute. 53% of the likely Democrats in that survey claimed to have favored abolishing the highest court in the country. Rasmussen Reports did a deep dive into those numbers and asked people of various ages, races, and political affiliations if they thought the Supreme Court was fundamentally racist. Rasmussen found that 15% strongly agreed that the Supreme Court is racist, 19% somewhat agreed, 18% somewhat disagreed, 43% strongly disagreed, and the rest were, well, unsure. Now, when asked if the U.S. Supreme Court is a fundamentally sexist institution that favors men over women, 21% strongly agreed, 20% somewhat, 13% somewhat disagreed, and 42% strongly disagreed. 5% answered that, they're just not sure on that one either. Now, joining us now to help us understand these numbers, as he does so well, is head pollster for Rasmussen Reports, Mark Mitchell. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. And as always, the devil's in the details. So first, I'd like to say thanks to the Heartland Institute. They have impeccable timing, and this was a really great time to ask this set of questions. Every once in a while, we track SCOTUS favorability, and it's usually bad, but not quite Congress bad. So voters usually unanimously agree somewhere in the mid-30s to low 40s. You have a favorable opinion. So that's pretty low. But the first question we asked was Supreme Court favorability, and now Republicans have a 72% favorability rating on the Supreme Court. That's more than twice of what Democrats are still in the 30s. So the difference here after Roe Wade isn't that the Democrats are more upset with the Supreme Court, it's that Republicans are happier. And I wish we had asked that set of questions back in December 2020. Pretty interesting. So let's start with the race one, and let's go to race. So 15% of voters strongly agree that the Supreme Court is a racist institution. If you look at race, white voters, it's 13% strongly agree, and for Black and Hispanics, it's about 20%. So not that much of a difference, and the numbers are really low. If you add in somewhat agrees, 27% of white voters agree that the Supreme Court's racist, and 54% of Black voters. So it's about a two times advantage there. Now, if you look at parties, that's where all the difference is. Only 6% of Republican voters strongly agree that the Supreme Court is racist, 26% of Democrat voters. If you add in the somewhat agrees, 14% of Republicans agree, 56% of Democrats. So 4 times more likely for a Democrat to say that the Supreme Court is racist. So looking at sex, the first thing we'll go to is sex. And once again, it's not that big of a difference. So for strongly agree that the Supreme Court is sexist, men, it was 15%, women, 26%. Very slight advantage. Looking at the parties, though, and adding in somewhat agrees, 18% of Republicans agree and 67% of Democrats. So once again, almost a 4 times different.
Wow.
Now, yeah, very different. So looking at the abolish question, I want to be very clear and specific about the way we asked this. We said, do you want to abolish the Supreme Court and replace it with a democratically elected panel of judges? 22% of voters strongly agree with that, strongly favor. With Republicans, it was 11%. With Democrats, 33%. So once again, Democrats 3 times more likely to say that they want to abolish the Supreme Court. But also the numbers are still relatively low. I think one of the things you can look at to say, well, there's still some respect for the institutions, is that 53% of Democrats favor this, but 63% of Democrats have an unfavorable opinion of the Supreme Court. So there's still some people that are willing to take their licks and don't want to upset the horse cart.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is due to the media hype as well and how the narrative they spin. And speaking of that, I want to move on to Ukraine because I think what Americans believe about Ukraine is a direct result of our media. You also recently polled on that. You said you asked them if they believe that Zelensky should be willing to give up territory in Russia. 19% said yes, but 63% said that Ukraine should keep fighting. And when it came to how likely is it that Russia will take over the entire Donbass region, only 29% said that it's very likely, 37% said somewhat likely, but it still seems they think it's more likely than not, which might be in line with the situation. We'll talk to an expert after this. But what do these numbers, real quick, about 40 seconds, tell us, Mark?
Yeah, well, 40 seconds. people are caring in America. They feel for Ukraine. They don't want to see this invasion happen. But once 2/3 of voters say that Russia's going to take over Donbass, I mean, that's looking like what's going to happen. I think the biggest takeaway, though, is that overall there's fading interest in Ukraine. And on the list of voter issues that we're tracking for the upcoming election, it's at number 11 after climate change. So it's just not a big issue for American voters anymore.